Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to a Monday Night Football edition of Establish the Show. I am Gary Hartman, joined as always by the greatest there is at Showdown Analysis, Cody Main. Cody, how you doing?
I am good. I'm ready for this Jake Browning-led Showdown slate. We'll see how things go. I think if I had looked at this game before week one kicked off, this is one I probably would have circled as one of those games I would have been excited about. We might have seen, with Joe Burrow under center, a 46, 47.5 point total, somewhere in that range. We're looking instead at a 40-point total. We've got the Bengals as 10-point dogs, basically all but eliminated from the playoff hunt, which is a huge bummer for football fans everywhere. But I think still some interesting angles on the Showdown slate. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, 40-point over under, 10-point spread. I agree. I think if you said like right around week one or the end of preseason, oh, wow, we got a week 13 Monday night Jaguars Bengals. That's like probably competing for like the 2-3 seed in the AFC or something like that, 3-4 seed. Here we are. Jaguars still in that hunt. Obviously, what's happened with the Bengals, very unfortunate. But, worth noting, even without the Burrow injury and kind of the disaster season that's happened for the Bengals, they've had a really bad defense this year. And I think that's something that a little bit underreported overall. Been pretty bad, stopping the run, stopping the pass. So definitely something we'll talk about here as we get into our position by position discussion. Cody, I don't think you or any of the field, except maybe 1%, would have the balls to do a Bengals onslaught here at 1%. But anything else that stood out to you construction-wise or salary-wise tonight?
Really interesting look at this slate from kind of a mile-high view. Obviously, you can see on Gary's screen, 22.1% of the field projecting to use the 5-1 Jaguars onslaught. I think that's as lopsided as we've probably seen all season. And, that actually includes some 49ers Giants slates. That includes the recent Cowboys Seahawks slate where everyone was into the Cowboys stuff. That includes the Bills Giants slate. This one is very lopsided. It's very lopsided for a couple of reasons. Obviously, you have the 10-point spread kind of funneling into team level projections. You have Jake Browning now under center, which is going to make the entire Bengals offense a little bit less efficient, or way more less efficient than they would be with Joe Burrow under center. But then also you have like T. Higgins returning, which is kind of a big deal. His return, while he's too expensive to get too excited about, also kind of makes the guys that were filling in behind him too expensive to get excited about when they were priced up in his absence. So you kind of have this culmination of factors where all of a sudden we're seeing this huge projection on Jaguars onslaught lineups, and even more so, on the 4-2 stuff, which I do think will be the most common roster construction tonight. I think it's okay to still play that stuff, especially if you expect the Jaguars to go out and handle business and take care of this game as a 10-point home favorite. There are some very interesting options on that side of the ball. Of course, we'll get into those in a second. Just be very cognizant of the types of rosters that you're building if you're going this direction. They're all going to look very similar, right? Like if you're going 4-2, you're going to have T-Law, you're going to have Travis Etienne, you're going to probably have the Jags D, and then you're probably going to have somebody like Jamar Chase or Joe Mixon or somebody like that on the bring back. So just be cognizant of that. Those rosters are going to be very similar to one another. So if you want to do that, make sure you're forcing in some of those rules that help you be a little bit more unique. I don't know. This it's going to be part of my lineup filtration process tonight, that if a lineup is 1-5 and it's appearing optimal more often than I think it's going to be duplicated, it's going to make my pool. So I will try to have some Bengals onslaughts. I just don't know if it's going to happen enough to really have too much exposure to it in even like a 150 set. But I do think that that 2-4, I feel like there's a pretty narrow band that it's going to come in around 8 to 12% total ownership once we flip the cards. And I think that's something that I do want to get some exposure to. We'll talk about some of these Bengal pieces in a second here individually, but I think that 2-4 side, if you think they can keep this game close or even come out and pull off an upset, I think that's a pretty interesting angle at 10.9% projected ownership.
Yeah, I talk about this in NBA a lot. There are guys that have 1, 2, 3% projected ownership that we've seen break slates before, or at least appear optimal. And I'm not saying 5-1 without, or 1-5 without Joe Burrow is that, but if you're seeing it at 1% clip and you are an MME type player, or you're playing a ton of lineups, why not get a little bit over the field on that, right? You just get yourself immediate uniqueness, and it's one NFL football game. You never know what could happen. So that's kind of my thoughts on that as well. And the great thing about that is you can get 3 or 4% of 1-5, 3%, and you're still getting well over the field. So I wouldn't do it unless you're like a mass entry player personally, but that's kind of where I'm at. with
And
that type
the
of
one thing
play.
that I always want to remind you too, like when you're filtering through your 150 set or trying to find the most desirable lineups to submit, once you find a lineup that is 1-5, you can kind of see that, okay, even if I'm entering a 100-person field, 1,000-person field, let's say, there's going to be 1% of that field. Like, you don't have to do all of these extra things to try and get different once you've already
Right.
gotten onto that 1-5. So once you know you're playing that type of roster construction, you have to do way less things. You have to pull way fewer levers to try and also have a unique team around that. So that's one of the things I kind of like about that. If a 1-5 team is profiling well, it's going to be optimal more often than I think it's going to be duplicated. I know once I get there, I don't then have to throw in a bunch of low owned pieces around it. I can just play it as it kind of stands there.
Awesome. Let's dive in. First of all, Jay, shout out to you, man. That's appreciate the props, but congratulations to you. I don't know which one it was that you took down, but that's awesome. We're so happy to see any success that you all have been having. And we've been seeing it last couple showdown slates for sure. Cody obviously crushing the DK Metcalf flag plant on Thursday. Our own Andrew Wiggins last night taking down 100K casually in Showdown. So I don't know if he wants that to be blown up, but just did it anyway. And yeah, really happy to see all the success. Hopefully we can keep that rolling for you guys all tonight. Let's start with the quarterback position as always, Cody. And really the conversation on this slate to me is Trevor Lawrence a lock button candidate? Certainly in cash. I can make the argument in tournaments too. So it was a slow start for T-Law this season. He had one game where he scratched 20 DraftKings points in his first 10 weeks of the season. And that was in week 5 in Buffalo. Since then, though, week 11 and week 12, maybe easy matchups, Tennessee and Houston, but 32 DraftKings points, 28 and a half DraftKings points, over 30 dropbacks in each of those. 3 combined rushing touchdowns over those 2 games. So maybe that isn't necessarily sticky, but I think I said this, I don't know if it was on your show or the Chalking show I do. I think last year he really turned it on around this time as well. So maybe this is just the kind of guy that he is, where he is a second half / third, fourth quarter of the season type of player. We know those ceiling performances live in there, and this is a really good matchup. So way underpriced for me is Trevor Lawrence at 10-8. How are you feeling about T-Law?
Yeah, dominated in good matchups in week 10 or week 11 and week 12 after kind of a down performance in week 10. And, this is kind of what we're expecting here too. This is a really good matchup for Trevor Lawrence, 10-point home favorite. Obviously, we don't have a bunch of options to choose from up at the top of the board. We've got 2 quarterbacks to pick from and a couple of skill position players that we're interested in. But once you remove some of the other players, we're not talking a main slate here. We're talking just limited options available. It's a Bengals pass defense that ranks 26th in pass EPA per play. They're near the top in explosive plays allowed. And again, you've got the signal caller for an offense that's going to, have a fairly balanced run pass split as long as the scoreboard requires it. And it's at home. They're 10-point favorites, good team total. I think you can make a pretty strong case for just locking him in, basically going if you're using an optimizer, min 1 Trevor Lawrence at captain or flex. You just got him in every lineup. I think you can make a case to do that. I pretty much got there last night with Mahomes at like 91% total exposure to Mahomes. So I don't necessarily feel the need to go full lock button on these types of situations. I just know that using the process that I'm using, I'm going to get pretty dang close anyway. And I kind of feel that way about Trevor Lawrence tonight. I think if I'm running 20 or 150 lineups or somewhere in between, probably going to end up somewhere close to that. I will say, and the sim analysis is posted on the site now, so ETR subscribers can see that we're showing a little bit of negative leverage on Trevor Lawrence at captain, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I know we're seeing 17.6% projected ownership right now. I actually think once the show's over, I'll probably adjust that number down. But I still think I want most of my T-Law exposure at flex in both small and large field tournaments. And we'll talk about some more interesting captain options in a second on the Jaguars side. I kind of get the sense, because we've got the money to get up there, that he's going to end up being a little bit too owned at captain for me. And I just want to take shots at on the pass catchers instead.
You actually bring up a really good point with Mahomes. I wasn't studying last night's slate because I didn't have a chance to play it. So I don't know where ownership projections and obviously, what the Sims were saying for him. But you said he come in around 91%. I would imagine he was projecting and looked like the best play on the slate, but he wasn't optimal, Cody. And, that's something to consider, right? Like, it looks like by all factors that Trevor Lawrence, to me, looks like the best play on the slate, especially from a flex perspective. But I guess we should consider the fact that that isn't a lock that he's going to be optimal. I was looking at the optimal lineup from last night. It was a 4-2 Packers on DraftKings. We did have 2 Chiefs, but it was Pacheco and Rashee Rice. no Patrick Mahomes. So I guess that's just like a lesson in, take everything we say as far as lock button, all that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. And maybe the 90% type of thing is the way to go. You still get a little bit of leverage, but you give yourself a little wiggle room. That said, I completely understand like wanting to take that full on, I'm putting my stamp down stand. But I guess that's kind of a personal preference thing. Cool.
Yeah, I think that's,
go ahead.
and not to get too meta on like the DFS stuff, but like I think that does come down to a risk tolerance thing mostly. I think it comes down to do you feel confident enough in the 5 remaining spots of your roster to get unique elsewhere, and how much correlated risk do you want? If God forbid, we certainly do not want this to happen with as many quarterback injuries as we've already dealt with, but taking on this 100% correlated risk with Trevor Lawrence in every lineup, if he goes out and suffers a sprained ankle on the first drive, are you okay losing 100% of your buy-ins on that slate? If that's the case, then by all means, that's an interesting, that's one way you can play it. I'm generally okay in some spots like that where I feel most confident. Again, it's rarely going to be exactly 100% for me, but somewhere like 85, 90% of my total exposure or my total lineups having exposure to one guy, generally I'm going to be okay with if it's somebody like a quarterback on a showdown slate.
All right, Jake Browning, the much more interesting discussion. And I know Cody kind of hit you all with the DK Metcalf flag plant on Thursday, but I hope you listened to me and that I thought Geno Smith was a really underutilized flex option on Thursday night. Anytime you see a quarterback come in with like 30% total ownership, and I think Geno ended up at 25% total on Thursday or something like that. That is something that I'm really interested in on a 1-game slate. Now, a couple differences. We saw Geno Smith have many ceiling games last year. It's a top 12 quarterback. Jake Browning is Jake Browning. We've had 2.5 game sample at this point of Jake Browning as an NFL quarterback. He is on the road. He's a 10-point dog. I don't know if he has the 20 plus points that I probably need from him tonight for me to feel as strong about getting above the field as I did Geno. However, I'm using this Geno example because they kind of stand out to me. It's a road underdog that has a big, potential pass game volume coming his way, right? So that said, 10 points, should be playing from behind, 30% total, 2%, 2.5% captain. This seems like a really interesting tournament play to me.
I'm trying to get ownership right here because I think this is ultimately going to be important, whether you're using contest sims or if you're just running an optimizer and you're trying to manipulate some of the things in the optimizer to get your ownership projections where you want it to be, your cumulative ownership projection, your product ownership projection, where you want it to be. Final ownership here on Jake Browning is going to be important, and whether he shows up as like a positive leverage play individually or whether he shows up as a negative leverage play individually is going to be kind of come down to where final ownership settles in. The projection's actually pretty nice on Jake Browning. 16-point race projection at 8,800. We rarely see it. A lot of that goes down to the fact that we expect this Bengals offense to pass a lot. They're going to be less efficient than they have been, of course, with Jake Browning under center versus with Joe Burrow under center. But he's got a pretty good complement of skill position weapons around him. Obviously, we'll talk about T. Higgins being back, Jamar Chase still there, Tyler Boyd, Tanner Hudson at the tight end position coming on, Joe Mixon a plus out of the backfield as a pass catcher as well. It's to be seen whether Zach Taylor is going to maintain his pass happy ways for the rest of the way with Browning under center. But at least in the first 6 quarters with Browning under center, he has been relatively as equally pass happy as he was with Burrow under center. And I think part of the reason why we have such a good projection on him, at least relatively speaking, is because of some of those things. So it takes a big grain of salt here, but I think just based off of what we have seen the field do, and there's some kind of psychological element here too, some kind of human behavior element here. We've seen a bunch of quarterbacks come in that sub 30% range when they've been big underdogs. We've seen Tyson Bagent at 9K come in at 28%, Baker Mayfield at 9,200, 27%, Aiden O'Connell, 22.9. Wow. Tyrod Taylor at 9,400, 22%. Zach Wilson, wow. Of course, maybe a different story there. 9K coming in sub 20% owned. Obviously don't want to apply what has happened in the past to what I think is going to happen in the future. But I do think the field's going to see a backup quarterback on the road as a 10-point dog where he's priced around some attractive skill position players and say, no, thanks, not for me. And I think just based off of kind of where we stand at ETR on Browning, that's probably a mistake. So for me, If I think this 31.4% holds, I want to get well overweight on that in small and large field tournaments. I'm thinking, 40, 50% kind of in that range, maybe even more. And I don't know if I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think 2.8% captain ownership is a bit light on Jake Browning. I think it should probably be closer to 4, 5, 6% maybe. And so if that's a spot you want to take a little bit of a stance and try to get some positive leverage there, I do think coming in a little bit overweight, that 2.8% that I feel pretty good is going to stick in that range is probably a good spot on this slate tonight. Again, all of this kind of pending ownership holding, but I kind of get the sense that it will.
I completely agree. And just to give a little hint to the people, our sims say that the ownership is light compared to optimal times, both in flex and captain for Jake Browning at the moment. You never know what may happen. I like it. Also, should note a couple things. Was 4 for 40 on the ground in his first start against Baltimore there. So maybe there is a little juice there if he's pressured. And again, Zach Taylor still wants to pass the ball. They're going to be playing from behind. The Jags have given up some big quarterback scores this year. So there's a lot to me going in the favor of Jake Browning. I like it quite a bit. All right, let's go to the running back position. Let's start on the Jacksonville side. ETN, technically questionable heading into tonight. I think he's all cleared, ready to go. One of the most expensive plays. Is he the most expensive play on the slate? Second most expensive play on the slate after T-Law. Been a great season for ETN, no doubt about it. I was starting to wonder did he peak mid-season here? Week 7, that 4-game stretch, week 5 through 8, 39, 23, 22, 26 DraftKings points. Now we've had 3 straight weeks of pedestrian, 6, 8, 12.5. However, I do think they want to, when the game is under control, they want to ride it out with ETN. Usually, if they're getting up big in some capacity, the Jaguars, I would imagine Travis Etienne has something to do with that. So overall, this all seems pretty efficient to me. A 30-point ceiling, that's nothing to scoff at. We got a 61 total ownership, 15% captain. One of those classic Cody numbers to me that just obviously seems kind of efficient. I don't have much of a problem with any of this ETN stuff.
Yeah, I think the interesting discussion here, and I don't think the people came here to tell us that Travis Etienne is a good on-paper play tonight. This is like a kind of the dream spot for a running back. You get him as a double-digit home favorite, B, against one of the league's worst run defenses, and C, virtually in a bell cow back role. Now we'll talk about Dearness Johnson in a second. He's been working in a little bit more. Travis Etienne is dealing with the rib injury. Expect him to be totally fine. But again, this is kind of the stone nut spot for a DFS running back, specifically on a single game slate where options are limited. This is a Bengals run defense that has allowed the league's 3rd highest explosive rush rate, the most yards before contact per attempt, and the 5th lowest stuff rate. So when they're not dropping back to pass, I do expect Travis Etienne to be eating up this Bengals run defense on the ground. I think the interesting discussion and what people came here to have the discussion about is that captain ownership. And I think if I've had a leak in projecting ownership, it has been at captain, and it's been trying to find the happy median on these very highly projected, highly to be owned projected running backs like Travis Etienne. We saw it last night with Pacheco. I think I had him at like 14.5%, ended up coming in at like 19.5%. It's a little bit too wide of a miss for me to feel comfortable in. So I've kind of gone back, looked at some of the 2023 results, seen what the field is doing a little bit. And I think in these spots, we had it last night with the Chiefs as a 6-point favorite. When we have big favored running backs, that's a spot where the field likes to kind of push their chips in. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but that's where a lot of the big misses have been coming from in terms of our ownership projections versus what the field is actually doing. I've had 25 different captains that have come in more than 5% higher owned than I've projected. 13 of 25 are running backs. First of all, 21 of 25 come from favorites. So generally I'm missing light on favorites. 13 of those 25 are specifically running backs. I think this is a spot where we just talked about Trevor Lawrence probably being a little bit high in his projected captain ownership. I think Travis Etienne is a little bit low. And if I had to make any adjustment as of right now, I would probably bring Etienne a little bit closer to like 20%, where I think he's a little bit more, even more efficiently owned, or maybe slightly over owned at captain. And if it starts to push higher than that, maybe in some smaller field stuff, then I want to start to shy away a little bit and start to think about some of these pass catchers. But again, we go back to the spot for Travis Etienne. This seems like a phenomenal spot for him. Just keep in mind, ownership projections will be final. Once we get inactives and things like that, keep in mind, I think this 15.2% is likely to come up, if anything.
That's great meta breakdown, Cody, of your own history.
Try to find your flaws,
so,
man, because there's definitely leaks within the ownership projections, and that's been one. Last night when we flipped the cards and I saw Pacheco, I was like, damn, I feel like this has kind of been a spot that I've been missing this season, and it definitely was. And so favorites, running backs on favorites, specifically when the spread gets kind of in this range, 6+ a touchdown plus, like the field kind of just loves to say, you know what, forget it. I don't care what the ownership is. I'm pushing my chips in here.
I mean, that's no joke of a sample. That's over 50% of your misses on being late on ownership, being running backs and favorites. Like that's a serious chunk. So keep that in mind for Etienne. I would agree. And my thought for sure, because you do have Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley and to an extent Evan Ingram as guys that have ceilings on this slate, on this team, including Trevor Lawrence, who, if he continues this rushing touchdown upside that he's shown over the last 2 weeks, would not only eat into Etienne, but would make him a more optimal captain. There's enough on this Jaguar side for me to be comfortable coming in under the field here at captain if Etienne gets steamed up over 20%. Not even close. Like, I'm very comfortable with it, especially if I want to get heavy on Browning like I kind of do. And I'm just trying to paint myself a narrative that, hey, the Bengals are chucking. Maybe they keep the Jaguars to keep their foot on the gas. Again, we're always telling ourselves a story. We're painting a picture with Showdown. So all things to consider. Dearness Johnson's interesting because to me, that sticker price is a little too pricey at 4,200, but I still believe in the talent. He's kind of fully taken over as the RB2 here. And I think that'll keep ownership enough off him, and he's straight leverage off Etienne, who's dealing with an injury, always at risk to get re-injured, someone that's going to touch the ball a lot. And this is not that much ownership on a guy that, if he were given an enhanced role, whether it's because they're trying to limit Etienne or they get up big or Etienne gets hurt, that's a smash at 4,200. So that's a spot personally that I in GPPs would be looking to get over the field.
Bingo. You nailed it. And if he had been like 2,800 or 3,200, this one that is one of those that's super sensitive to price. If he had been, like I said, even 1,000 cheaper, probably someone that would be extremely popular just for the salary savings that he offers you, so you can get back up to some of these more expensive guys. I think being at 4,200, it's not necessarily a so bad it's good type play. It's so expensive that it's tough to get there type of play.
Right.
I think for that reason, it makes him a pretty interesting GPP option. Not only with just the out that Etienne, re-injures himself, or the coaching staff takes it a little bit easier on Etienne. This is a 10-point spread if the Jags do go out and cover. Short week, kind of a natural spot for the team to try and find opportunities to rest Etienne. I think you could see Dearness Johnson increase on his already pretty decent role in this offense over the last couple of weeks. It's been a 22% rush share since week 9. He's running around on 28% of dropbacks. I think even if it's the same role, there's certain outcomes where he could pay off that price tag. So I do like Dearness Johnson if that ownership is going to hold.
That's such a good point too, because say they do cover and they're up like 17-20 in the third and fourth quarter. This isn't like a scat back or someone without a decent amount of experience that they wouldn't feel comfortable running out the clock. Like, this is a 230-pound back that's had plenty of NFL success before. I could totally see them taking it easy on Etienne and giving Dearness all those let's run out the clock carries. That's a great point. So let's see what happens there. But I think he's a very interesting play for sure. All right. Bengals side, we have chat talking about how Joe Mixon sucks. And I don't disagree. I don't think Joe Mixon is a great NFL player anymore. But one thing Joe Mixon still has is an excellent role. And the price for that role, to me, is too cheap. So 44%, 7% captain. How are you feeling about Mixon tonight?
Yeah, we've had a lot of these underdog running backs. Some of them road underdogs, some of them home underdogs. But it seems like the DraftKings is already kind of adjusting naturally for us. They're making Joe Mixon 7K. If it had been Joe Mixon with Joe Burrow under center, of course, and maybe not as a 10-point dog, but as like a 3-point dog at Jacksonville, we'd probably be looking at Mixon at like 8K, 8,600. So DraftKings is already kind of doing some of the legwork for us and saying, okay, we understand this isn't an ideal spot, so we're going to price him down. We just saw it with AJ Dillon filling in for Aaron Jones being out. We saw it with Zach Charbonnet filling in with Kenneth Walker being out. Those guys were underdog running backs, not in ideal spots against pretty good defenses. And they ended up being underpriced and coming in lower owned than we expected. Kind of getting the sense, and chat's kind of reaffirming my original belief that like Mixon's going to end up getting a little bit squeezed here too, because A, no one wants to play an underdog, 10-point underdog road running back. And B, I think the fact that Burrow's out is going to lead the field to have a way less confidence in this offense scoring touchdowns. But like you said, it's still a really strong role for Joe Mixon. And I think he's cheap enough that he's actually kind of in consideration for cash game contests. I think he fits that mold that if you want to go the 2-4 style, 2 Jags, 4 Bengals, I think he definitely fits that construction. He fits into 3 3s. He fits into 4 2s if you want to go 4 Jags, 2 Bengals. Really, this is kind of just a bet on volume here. A bet on volume, a bet on a guy that's probably a little bit underpriced relative to what his role would suggest. And again, if they keep this thing a little bit closer than the 10-point spread indicates, he's going to look like a pretty good play.
I have nothing to add. I think that's great breakdown. Let's keep moving along. Travion Williams, 400, will be the RB2 here, long down the distance guy potentially. So if you want to play, okay, we want to jam as many studs as possible game, plus their Bengals are playing from behind as 10-point dogs. I could see the case. There's not much of a projection here, though.
Yeah, not much of a projection. I think the $400 tag does keep him in play. I think even if you try to get up to some of the more expensive guys on the Jaguar side in kind of a blowout type script, the $400 tag is going to end up leaving money on the table, which hopefully in itself results in a little bit more of a unique roster construction. So I do think Travion is in play in GPPs where you do expect the Jaguars to cover the 10-point spread, and he's out there more in long down and distance plus 2-minute situations. One caveat before we move on to pass catchers, Chase Brown has been, I don't know, getting talked up, I guess, or talked about by Zach Taylor. I don't necessarily know that that's actionable, but rookie running back that maybe they want to see some work from. So keep that in mind as a full-blown stone min punt, less than 1% ownership, makes the player pool, really. If you ended up with like 1 to 2% and he happened to run onto the right team and gets there, then I think that's okay. But I kind of one of those bets that maybe the coaching staff just gets them a little more involved.
5th round rookie. This is about the time of the year that, especially teams that are out of contention, which by all intents and purposes, the Bengals are, you start to see those rookies getting some work. This is why they are so valuable best ball picks, right? Because right around playoff time is when they get their chance. So I wouldn't be surprised. I really wouldn't. If this game gets fully out of hand, I wouldn't mind an MME sprinkle on Chase Brown. Hard to do with 0 projection, basically, but wouldn't mind it. I do understand that taking that shot, and we're looking for uniqueness, right? And there's a spot to do it. All right, let's stay on the Bengals side for pass catchers. It's a tough spot because I talked about the fact that I like Jake Browning. If I like Jake Browning, I like someone here, I think, right? I don't think he fully gets there at 8,800. It's not so cheap that he doesn't bring some sort of pass catcher with him. I guess intuition says that's Jamar Chase, right? This is still one of the elite talents in the entire league. A couple things going against him. 1, he doesn't have Joe Burrow. 2, T. Higgins is back. Going on his side, 9-4, kind of cheap for Jamar Chase on a 1-game slate. Also, you got to figure, simplify the offense, get the ball in the hands of your best player. You could paint the bull or the bear case. How do you like Jamar tonight?
Yeah, totally agree with you. And that's kind of what we talked about off the front, why it's so difficult, fully understanding 10-point spread, everything, Joe Burrow not under center. Still, generally speaking, like DraftKings prices things in a way that will result in a little bit more balanced roster construction utilization table. Not so much on this case because you have T. Higgins returning for the first time. He's kind of at a normal price, I guess, as a 10-point dog with Jake Browning under center, 7,600 for T. Higgins. Probably actually a little bit too expensive, to be quite frank. And then you have Tyler Boyd below him, who is kind of at the price he would have been if T. Higgins was out. Trenton Irwin basically gets entirely removed from the offense. You have a 3-headed committee at tight end. So everything looks pretty gross, which kind of sets up this situation where all roads lead to Jamar Chase. 9,400, the one guy in the offense outside of really Joe Mixon that feels underpriced or at least appropriately priced at 9,400. 28.2 DraftKings point ceiling. Obviously going to be way less likely to access that type of ceiling, in my opinion, without Joe Burrow under center. But I think all of the things that you mentioned are why I'm still a little bit more bullish on him than really any other pass catcher in this offense. If you want to simplify the offense, if you want to keep the game competitive, kind of the way to do that is to get targets to the guy that you've been designing and scheming targets to all season. Whether it's Jake Browning or Joe Burrow, get the ball into Jamar Chase's hands. And I think that everything kind of bears that out, even when T. Higgins has been healthy. You've seen a higher total target share. You've seen a higher design target share. You've seen a little bit lower ADOT for Jamar Chase. So I think you're going to see some of these, you'll hear it on the broadcast, some of these design throws to get Jake Browning in a rhythm. I think that's something that's going to be said early and often, and Jamar Chase is going to be the recipient of a lot of those targets that are trying to get Browning into rhythm. I think he's a phenomenal play at 9,400. And if we like Browning at flex and a little bit of captain, I think he's kind of the natural pairing partner. For me, the way that I think I'm going through roster construction, going to end up with more Chase at captain and Browning and flex versus the other way around. So I do like getting quite a bit above that 8.6% captain ownership in my own personal builds on Mr. Jamar Chase.
Yeah, I know 4-2s will be popular, but a Chase captain with a Browning as my two Bengals, I love. And then if I could find ways to get unique on the Jacksonville side, I think is a construction that I'm very interested in. I know that wouldn't be unique in that sense. We have 8% captain ownership on Jamar or whatever. But hey, it's way less than it is on Etienne, on Lawrence, and I'm sure on some of these Jacksonville guys. So, I think that's something I'm interested in. All right, let's talk Higgins here. Hasn't played since week 9. When he did play in week 9, obviously that was still Joe Burrow time. That was his best game of the year. I think he had like a 9 for 116, and then unfortunately went down from there. This is still a very talented guy. Or 8 for 110 he was in that game, 9 targets. Talented guy. I don't know what to expect here with the Jake Browning offense as 10-point dogs. I don't even know what their team total is here. We haven't even brought that up, but all things that where when Joe Burrow's in under center, you can see a world where you get those true alpha doubles going. I don't see that tonight necessarily. So I kind of want to pick or choose one of these guys. Hard not to like Chase, but if you need the money, Higgins fully cleared, it seems like, much less ownership. I understand, as someone that has shown plenty of a ceiling as an NFL receiver in the past, I understand going there.
Yes, I get it. This is one of those ones we talked about ETN a little bit earlier. Feels pretty efficient to me, and I've got a few of these guys that tend to come through in every single MME portfolio for me, where I look at my exposures right before lock hits, and I see 23.3% projected ownership, and I've got like 22%. I see 3.8% projected captain ownership, and I've got like 3 to 4%. It's just one of those ones where I don't have a strong enough stance one way or another to say, I've got to come in underweight on T. Higgins, or I've got to come in double the field on T. Higgins. I don't have a strong enough take here, and kind of based off of looking at our first round of our sims, kind of feels the same way. It's one of those ones that could be sensitive to field type that you're playing in. In some of the really small field stuff, that's going to be much more dictated by projections, by kind of sim optimal stuff. I think T. Higgins could come in much lower, like mid-teens. And if you're talking about like a mid-teens T. Higgins at 7,600, I think that could be a much better play. But I do feel pretty strongly about our large field ownership projection coming in around 23%, which again, to me feels just about right.
Worth noting, I looked up while you were talking, the Bengals team total. It is the lowest of the entire week, even below the Jets. So they're like 14.5, 15. That's something to, let's trust Vegas. Let's believe in Vegas more often than not. So I'm talking about how much I like Chase and Browning. Just keep that all with a grain of salt. The Jaguars, meanwhile, are almost up at 25. So you see why this is a 10-point game spread. You spread all for sure, but you never know. 15 points. If it's 2 passes right to Jamar Chase or something like that, it could get it done for you. All right, rest of these guys, Boyd now with Higgins back, kind of goes right back into, yes, one of the best wide receiver 3s in football, but usually overpriced as a result, and kind of just middling target share, like right around 15%-ish with both those guys on the field. Erwin, you mentioned kind of out of the running now. I mean, you can still make your MME shot as the wide receiver 4, returns kicks type of guy. And then this is like a 4-man tight end by committee with Wilcox back tonight. So hard for me to want to get into too many of those guys. I guess Tanner Hudson as a legit pass catcher projecting the best of that group. But any takes on any of these guys, Boyd down?
Yeah, not falling all over myself to try and get into too much of this. I did write in the breakdown and kind of one thought that I had as going through roster construction. If we do think the 10.5 point spread sticks, there is likely going to be garbage time here at some point. And Tyler Boyd could be a big beneficiary of that. Lower ADOT, could be one of those guys that even if it's a super inefficient performance, could rack up 6, 7, 8 receptions just because of low ADOT, running out of the slot, things of that nature. So I don't want to say I don't like Tyler Boyd, but I think he fits into a certain type of roster construction where you don't need a super high ceiling from him, but you do end up getting some of that PPR volume late. I want to be excited about Tanner Hudson, but man, 4K is tough when Drew Sample's going to be out there, when Irv Smith is going to be out there, and Mitchell Wilcox even ran the route on like 10% of dropbacks last week. So it really is a 4-headed tight end by committee. Tanner Hudson has proven, I think we got a representative enough sample here that Tanner Hudson is good at earning targets at the NFL level, whether it be preseason or regular season. So when he's out there, he's going to earn targets. I just think, and I wrote it in the article too, like it feels a little bit like wish casting to hope that he's going to run or say that he's going to run a route on more than like 30% of dropbacks at this point. Kind of is what it is. If he happens to get 3 or 4 receptions and he does fall in the end zone, you're absolutely going to be doing backflips. But I think I'm kidding myself if I think Tanner Hudson's suddenly going to run a route on like 60% of dropbacks, even though he probably should be. So everyone kind of like, I mean, really chased down is pretty gross and pretty tough to get excited about outside of kind of MME dart throw type stuff. But it really does kind of feel that way. Higgins and Chase up top, of course, Tyler Boyd in the right game script, and then the rest of these guys, you just got to kind of mix and match in GPP lineups. Nothing that I'm overly excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point on like easy targets for Boyd and Hudson is fair, especially for a quarterback like Browning who might be playing from behind. You could probably make the same case for Mixon as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's all. I think that's all fair. I mean, I just did a quick look. Mitchell Wilcox receiving yards on the season, 18. Drew Sample, 82, I think. Yeah, 82. Irv Smith, the big offseason signing, hasn't even cracked 100 receiving yards on the season, 16 catches for 97 yards so far in this year. And then, of course, preseason Hall of Famer Tanner Hudson already at 193 receiving yards. So definitely the guy that has the most pass catching chops. There's no doubt about it. But, you know, priced up as a result there. Okay, let's talk Jacksonville's side. And one of the couple, there's a bunch of situations like this in fantasy football, right? Devonta Smith, AJ Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. Whose week is it? Between Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, two guys that now we had Ridley in week 1, then we had a lot of Christian Kirk, and now we've had a lot of Calvin Ridley over the last couple of weeks. Kirk still steady Eddie though, right there. $1,000 less, which is going to point people in the direction of him. Kind of reminiscent of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett last week, although I don't think we like the spot as much of a smash for Ridley as we did Metcalf that spot, but just, hey, like paying up to get a little bit under the field compared to the other guy. There's going to be plenty of ownership on both these two. I think go read Cody's article for kind of his detailed thoughts, but give the people what you think on these two guys.
Yep, I think you pretty much nailed it. These two are kind of operating in a relatively similar role. You obviously have a little bit lower ADOT for Kirk, which has resulted in a higher catch rate, but you've got the higher ADOT for Ridley, which has resulted in some of these big blow up games. He has a higher red zone target share. So you're kind of seeing some of these eruption spots from Ridley, while in the meantime, Kirk is out there giving you whatever, 12 to 16 or whatever, kind of in that range with the occasional 20-point game in the mix. Whereas on occasion, you're getting like single digit stuff from Ridley, which is frustrating. I still kind of feel that way in this spot. I think they're very similar usage type guys, going to generally score, at least on average, roughly the same fantasy points. I do think you generally end up getting a higher ceiling from Ridley, and you're going to end up with lower ownership. $1,000 difference in pricing. I think some of the matchup related stuff, which has become a little bit more prevalent this season as the field looks for kind of that next level beyond the surface level usage related stuff. You look at PFF, you look at some of the matchup related data, and it's going to look a little bit better for Christian Kirk, who is kind of, nuking, for lack of a better term, man coverage this season, which Cincinnati is running at the league's 10th highest rate. According to PFF, Kirk has a 3.32 yards per route run against man this season. I think anyone that sees that is going to be a little bit more excited about Christian Kirk. And I think that that's going to ultimately result, when it's all said and done, in more flex and more captain ownership. I don't necessarily think that it's going to get as blown out as you alluded to, like we saw with Lockett and DK Metcalf, where Metcalf came in at like 4% at captain and like 21% in flex. Wow. Don't think it gets that drastic. But I do think that it's going to be a little bit spread out here. And if forced to choose only one in GPP specifically, understanding that ownership is going to, widen, the gap in ownership is going to widen a little bit here, I think I would prefer Ridley.
I'm going to keep it moving along. I think that's a great breakdown. Both guys are excellent plays tonight. It's kind of your preference, what fits in your lineup. I don't have much to add. The next two guys are way more interesting of a conversation. Proc saying everyone's told him it's an Evan Ingram night. We are seeing all these numbers about how bad the Bengals are against tight ends. They give up a huge game to Pat Freiermuth. Evan Ingram, all underlying stuff. Cash game players love Evan Ingram this year. They love him because he doesn't get too juiced up. I feel like Levitan's probably played him like 9 times in cash this year. Doesn't get too juiced up because he hasn't found the end zone, but his target share is great. Has had half his games right around double-digit DraftKings points, but hasn't had any explosion games because he isn't finding that end zone. But 6'2", with a good projection on him, is going to result in some ownership. In fact, right around the same amount of ownership, both flex and captain, as Kirk and Ridley. So to me, just give me the higher ceiling guys in Kirk and Ridley, but I get that's a simplified way to do it. These $2,000 less. So how are you looking at Evan Ingram tonight?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Especially after what Freiermuth did last week, where you see him put up a clearly a ceiling performance for him, a ceiling performance for any tight end in the National Football League. I think everyone talk about me wish casting for some Tanner Hudson targets. I think everyone is wish casting an Evan Ingram touchdown tonight. I mean, this is the spot, right? But as everyone says, and as you've alluded to too, though, like Cincinnati isn't just bad against tight ends. Cincinnati is bad against running backs. Cincinnati is bad against receivers. Cincinnati's defense is just bad. And so, yes, you're going to see some explosive plays given up to the wide receiver position, to Travis Etienne out of the backfield, and probably to Evan Ingram as well. I think as you're just going through and looking at what optimal lineups are spitting out, they're spitting out a lot of Evan Ingram. They're spitting out a lot of Evan Ingram at captain because he is 6,200, and that kind of allows you to fit a few more studs in the flex position. So I'm getting this nervous feeling that Evan Ingram's going to end up being, he's kind of already up there, but if not one of kind of right there with the top dogs as like the most owned player on the entire slate. Not going to say a bad thing about the on paper matchup. Not going to say a bad thing about Evan Ingram's role. To me, it just kind of comes down to an ownership related play.
So yeah, to put a bow on the Ingram discussion, 0 touchdowns this season, right? That's obviously an outlier for the amount of volume he's had. So positive regression likely coming in the touchdown department. However, I will say, shout out to JJ Zacharyson, does a great job with his trend shows, does a good job with most of his podcasts every week. But I listened to the trend show, I think it was last week, which is just like quick nuggets on players. And he brought up this point about Evan Ingram. And I guess it's kind of because of the routes he's running and the targets he's earning. And this isn't, you go listen to the podcast for the more in detail thing, but he's saying like his touchdown over expectation number is like he should have had 1.25 more touchdowns than he has this season. So it's like, yes, there's positive touchdown regression coming. He should have scored more than he has, but it's not like, I think that's the number, by the way. Don't hold me to it. But it's like based on the kind of way he's used, which is kind of short field, not necessarily around the red zone, et cetera. Don't expect him just to fall into the end zone all the time. Yes, it's fluky that he has not scored yet, no doubt. But it's not like, oh, we got a great matchup here. He's projecting incredibly. That means he's definitely going to score tonight. So just something to consider, especially if he's going to be chalky. All right. Zay Jones, much more interesting conversation to me. This is a guy last year, before Calvin Ridley was in town, that was perpetually underpriced, made my cheap wide receiver volume column like every single week. I think it would caught like 90 balls or something last year. All something to consider. Now he's like firmly in that wide receiver 3 role. I know you wrote in your article, target share has been kind of just meh, kind of playing behind all 3 of those guys, including Ingram now. But another week under his belt after he was like really missed the entirety of the beginning of the season, right? Didn't really come back until week 11, really. He had a couple of T coming back in week 5, then didn't come back for 2 weeks till 2 weeks ago. He's earned 7 targets over the last 2 weeks. I don't hate Zay Jones as like a large field tournament play here. I think he's straight up pivot to all those 3 guys above him. Has shown a chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. You just never know. Somebody gets hurt in front of him, whatever. Touchdowns are fluky, etc. I think he's intriguing at 5.2. He's like a little too expensive where the field's not going to get there.
Yep, I think one of those points that you mentioned is perfect. He is direct leverage off of those other 3 guys. And that doesn't mean that Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley can't get there in a game where Zay Jones puts up a slate winning type performance, whether it's a flex or captain. Those other guys can still get there. But if Zay Jones is the one finding the end zone as the result of some positive touchdown luck, then yes, offers great leverage off the guys that are going to be 2, 3x as owned as he is. So I think for that reason, he's interesting as a large, even small field tournament option at 5,200. He also offers kind of price point leverage about, position we'll talk about next at kicker and at defense on the Jaguar side. I think both of those options will be very popular tonight too. So I do think you kind of get this double-edged sword that could be a positive, could be a negative, could end up looking really bad, but offers direct leverage off of the more popular pass catchers and off the more popular players priced directly around him. So I do like Zay Jones. One of those spots where you would, if I told you what my exposure was pre-lock, you'd be like, oh, wow, Cody, way to take a real big stance on him. But I think someone that I want, 25-ish% of, maybe 2 to 3, 4% of captain. Don't need to go crazy with Zay Jones, but I would like to come in a little bit higher than the field is on him.
Yeah, a lot of guys competing in front of him from a skill position standpoint on his own team, including those 3 names you see above him, and Travis Etienne, and arguably Trevor Lawrence, the way he scored the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, there's a lot that needs to go right. But I do think he's used enough and the coaching staff trusts him enough that he should be in that mix. Okay. Anyone else you're interested in here? I think we're just looking at a ton of punts at this point.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are guys that are going to make your MME player pool. You see really like all of the, I don't know, sub 3K. I don't even know where like the true punt range starts, but we'll just call it like Luke Farrell and below, or Luke Farrell and below. Like all of them kind of in like the 2 to 5% ownership range, because you just don't need to go to all of them. We talked
Right.
about it a little bit off air, but I think that because the top of the slate is a little bit underpriced, at least relative to a normal Showdown slate, and the mid tier is a little bit underpriced as well, it just kind of is like make the best combinations of that group that you can, throw some of the guys that we'll talk about next into that mix as well. And you don't really need to punt a bunch. So I do think that the stars and scrubs lineups that are usually popular will be a little bit less popular tonight. And so I think those are a little bit more interesting. But most of these guys, I'll call it 2,600 and below, or just like MME dart throws type sprinkles. No one that I'm excited about to the point where I want to get like, I don't know, 15 to 20% exposure, more guys that I'm kind of like in that 8 to 10% range on.
Awesome. Let's talk specials here. Let's just have its own DST discussion, because the Jags are going to get super steamed here. The 4,800, we're looking at 40%. I think some of our optimals are saying Jags captain as well, Cody. So give me your captain spiel with Jacksonville, as well as your just thoughts in general here.
Yeah, I think Jags captain at 4,800 is going to be one of those spots where it's like, okay, I plug in the Jags D as a 10-point home favorite against Jake Browning and pretty bad Cincinnati offensive line. And then after I've done that, I can get Christian Kirk, I can get Evan Ingram, I can get Travis Etienne, I can get Trevor Lawrence, and it kind of just creates this very easy, natural build that funnels into that 4-2 construction we talked about, or the 5-1 construction. And you've got the requisite salary that you need to fill out your favorite flex options. So that's going to be very popular. We missed in a big way on Dallas's defense, both flex ownership and captain ownership on Thursday night against the Seahawks. I'm trying to correct for that here. I don't know if I've corrected enough. I think the field will see this price tag. I think the field will see the spread. I think the field will look at the team total for the Bengals. They'll see Jake Browning under center, and they'll say, let me load up on the Jaguars defense as much as I can. We got 40% nearly total ownership, 7.3% captain, which is right there in that same range as Evan Ingram, right there in that same range as Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley. I would be a little bit surprised if they ended up coming in around that range of the Cowboys D that we saw at 13% on Thursday night. But I wouldn't be totally shocked by it. Be a little surprised, but not totally shocked by it. So keep that in mind. It's going to be one of those spots where it's going to be an uncomfortable position to take an underweight stance on. But we saw it just pay off on the last Showdown slate that we discussed, where 40% plus of the field, I think, took a negative at defense, with the Cowboys scoring -1 points. And at a position that's as volatile as defense is, I think that's generally going to be the route you're going to be happiest with, is coming in underweight those spots.
Completely agree. Any thoughts on the Bengals at 3,200 here?
Way more interesting. Way more interesting. Not as good of a defense. Clearly, we've spent all show badgering how bad, making fun of how bad they are, both against the pass and against the run. However, they're $1,600 cheaper. Just talked about how defensive scoring is extremely volatile. Could come down to something as random as a pick six or a strip sack or something along those lines. They make some unique roster constructions work. And because 4-2 and 5-1 roster constructions are going to be so prevalent, Bengals D is like, I think, maybe there's a little bit higher ceiling there on their ownership. Maybe it comes in 13, 14, but I think there's a pretty soft cap, maybe even a hard cap, kind of in that 14 to 15% range, just because so much of the field is going to be loading up on Jags. You're not going to want to run it back with, Bengals defense as one of your bring back options. So I think you're going to end up seeing pretty low ownership here. You're hoping to run into some variance. Seahawks were kind of in a similar boat as a 9-point road dog against the Cowboys. They ended up scoring, I think, 0 fantasy points. They may have also been in the negative too, if memory serves. You're just kind of hoping to run pure a little bit here and run into one of those high scoring events where you do get the pick six, you do get the strip sack, something along those lines. But again, at a position that is going to be as random and as volatile as defense, much more likely to try and take shots there when it's going to come with like 9, 10, 11% ownership.
For sure. All right. We talk about the Zay Jones of the world, Tyler Boyd to an extent. And then the other guys in that price range are the kickers usually. So Brandon McManus cracking that 5K range. I mentioned the Jaguars got like a 25-point team total. You could certainly see a fair amount of field goal attempts from McManus tonight. Conversely, McPherson, a very good kicker. Maybe this is a team tonight that is not successfully converting on trips that they get down to the red zone. You could see some options there. You save some money, less ownership. I think there's a decent case to be made for both these kickers tonight.
Yeah, agree. Everything feels relatively efficient here. I think McPherson might be a little bit under-owned. You could see Browning have a little bit of success moving the ball, getting the offense into scoring position, but maybe struggling to close out drives as they get into scoring position. So I think that McPherson's an interesting option, and of course $400 cheaper, and a very good kicker in his own right. I think McManus kind of fits into that fringe cash game roster construction because the Jags D is $200 cheaper and projects better. I don't think the field necessarily needs to go there, nor do you. But I think he's kind of fringy cash game option and someone that I would like to come in around that 25% on in tournaments as well.
All right, Cody, it is that time, coming off right up there with the best flag plan of the season. It was that or DJ Moore, who basically had identical games, 3 touchdown explosions. So congratulations on that great DK Metcalf call. Can you do it for the people once again? Who do you like tonight for your flag plan?
Yeah, I realized the move is just not trying to get a little bit too cute and just going up towards the top of the board with the guys that are the highest price.
Don't worry, I'll get too cute for us. So
yeah, okay, perfect. I'll give out one that I think is fairly likely to hit. 1 out of every 5, 1 out of every 10 type slates. When generally I'm looking at Gabe Davis types that are more likely to hit 1 out of every 20 or 50 or 100 slates. So let's go back to the well here. I think he is still positive leverage because he's under-owned at the captain spot. He is one of the best pure receivers in the league, even without his quarterback under center. Jamar Chase at 9,400 feels underpriced. I think because of the offensive concerns around him, because of T. Higgins coming back, because of Jake Browning under center, I do think that he's going to end up coming in pretty low at captain. Maybe gets closer to 10% than we have it projected there. We're going to get pretty low captain ownership on Mr. Chase. And if there is a guy that can replicate the DK Metcalf 3 touchdown performance, the DJ Moore 3 touchdown performance, it's a guy that leads his team in target share, air yard share, red zone target share, and is a stone cold alpha up there along the likes of DK Metcalf in the PSM as well. So I'm going back to the well with the PSM favorite, Jamar Chase.
Cody, it would not be a showdown slate where there's a big spread if we didn't pick on the same offense, and especially here, the quarterback wide receiver duo, because that's right, I'm doing it, folks. Give me Jake Browning. Particularly, this is a flex play. I do want to get over the field at captain a little bit, so it's a true flag plan. Don't get me wrong, but I think at flex, I want him in many different scenarios. Let's also keep in mind this is a Jaguars team that has given up a handful of 300-yard 2 touchdown games to quarterbacks. Even guys like Derek Carr, they gave up 300 yards and a touchdown through the air. Gardner Minshew, 329 yards through the air. Obviously, CJ Stroud's had a bunch of successful games. Will Levis threw 2 touchdowns on this team. And then, of course, the studs did their work, right? Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, Jake Browning is not that. What I'm saying is this is a team that can be thrown on, that teams drop back a lot against, and this is what this game script is calling for. 10-point dogs. Zach Taylor likes to throw the ball regardless. Maybe he runs the ball like we saw against Baltimore a little bit based on some pressure here. This is just, I wish I had the Stones to have flag punt to Geno the other night. Obviously, Metcalf would have been what you needed. But hey, if you had a Metcalf captain with Geno, you were feeling pretty good on Thursday. But I know I've done it every now and then. And usually when I flag punt a quarterback, it kind of falls flat on its face. And yes, we are flag punting probably the two highest projected Bengals skill position guys or offensive pieces here in a game that they're 10-point dogs. But doesn't mean you can't get heavy on Jags. We just like the Chase Browning of it all. And that's kind of where I'm at tonight. I know it's risky, but that's where I'm at.
I think we have a 0% success rate when we flag plant players on the same team. So hopefully this is the one where we keep
They'll score 6
rolling.
points. Like the Jets that one time. All right. That will do it for us. Go 5-1 Jaguars and feel good about yourself now, just because we both did that. All right. That'll do it for us. We will be back, Cody, on
Patriots Steelers
Thursday. Patriots Steelers
30.5-point total.
That's going to be no Kenny Pickett and Bailey, and that's going to be Mitch Trubisky, Bailey Zappi. Oh my God. That sounds like my worst nightmare. And then from there, we don't know how we're going to attack Monday night yet. There's 2 games Monday night. We'll figure that out. I'm guessing we'll do a 2-game show instead of the traditional Showdown, which maybe we'll cover Showdown a little bit on there, but stay tuned for that. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to check out everything we have going on at establishthorun.com, especially Would recommend subscribing if you are not, just to get the Sims stuff alone, but of course, all the great stuff in Discord that we have going on. Cody adds so much context there. We will see you all on Thursday. Best of luck to wrap up week 13 tonight. Thank you all for tuning in.